This video is brought to you by Squarespace. On the 15th of August 1965, the Beatles began their second US tour with a historic show in front of 55,600 fans at Shea Stadium in Queens, New York. It was the biggest audience ever for a rock concert and marked the birth of modern stadium rock.
Hello.
I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video we'll explore in detail the Beatles' biggest concert ever, the performance, the struggle to record it, and why you still can't watch it today. By August 1965, the Beatles had achieved their goal of becoming the toppermost of the poppermost. They were the best-selling group in the world, and arguably the finest live performers in the business. Ask anyone who had the privilege of attending a Beatles concert, and they will tell you that it was an experience like no other. From those who did attend, few heard anything the Beatles were playing, and even the Beatles themselves often struggled to hear themselves perform. But that wasn't the point. Fans could listen to the Beatles at home on their record players or on the radio. For them, the excitement was to see the Beatles in person, and at that moment, that was all that mattered. A day after arriving in New York for a second time, the Beatles recorded a performance of the same set they'd performed in Blackpool 2 weeks earlier at CBS Studio 50 for The Ed Sullivan Show, which would be broadcast on September the 12th. Although their North American tour the previous year had given them experience of large audiences and venues, nothing could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Sid Bernstein had started work as a booking agent for stars such as Dion and Chubby Checker in the early 1960s. And unlike the executives at Capitol Records, he recognized the talent and potential of the Beatles. In 1963, he contacted Brian Epstein and convinced him that the Beatles could be a success in the US, then went ahead and booked them for a gig at Carnegie Hall, without having heard a single note of their music. Although the two Carnegie Hall concerts in February '64 were terrible experiences for the Beatles because of the audience and acoustics, they were financially successful. Bernstein also promoted their show at the Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in New York on August 29th, 1964, which was seen by 16,000 fans. Based on this success, both Bernstein and Epstein believed the Beatles could go even bigger. Much bigger. Shea Stadium opened on April 17th, 1964, and became the new home of the New York Mets baseball team. Although the Beatles had performed in stadiums during the 1964 American-Canadian tour, their maximum capacity had been around 20,000. But no one had ever attempted to put a rock band inside a baseball stadium that could hold more than double the capacity of any of those other stadium venues. Tickets for the concert ranged from $4.50 to $5.75 and sold out in less than 3 weeks. The Beatles' share of the $304,000 box office takings came to a record $160,000, which is just over $2 million today. The concert at Shea marked the beginning of a 2-week, 10-city tour across North America, and recognizing its importance, manager Brian Epstein and Ed Sullivan Productions agreed to film the event for a Christmas TV special. However, things did not go quite as they'd planned. The original plan was for the Beatles to arrive at the concert by helicopter and land on the baseball diamond, but the New York authorities refused this. Instead, they flew over New York City to the roof of the World's Fair building in Queens. They were then transferred from the helicopter to a Wells Fargo armored van, where they were each given a Wells Fargo agent badge, and then driven the final 100 yards into the stadium. After enduring sets by the King Curtis Band, Cannibal and the Headhunters, Brenda Holloway, the Young Rascals and Sounds Incorporated, the 55,600 fans were at fever pitch as Ed Sullivan walked onto the stage and, in his own inimitable fashion, introduced the Beatles. The Beatles then burst out of the Wells Fargo van into the tunnel and sprinted onto the stage positioned at second base to a deafening wall of screams. Wearing military-style jackets inspired by the police in Bermuda, the Beatles took to the stage at 9:16 p.m. and performed a 12-song set lasting 34 minutes. As their performance in Blackpool a few weeks earlier had proved, the Beatles were at the top of their game as a live band, but in the conditions of Shea, their skills were put to the ultimate test. It was clear that the Beatles could hear very little of what they were playing, and what did come through was a testament to their skills and abilities as a live band.
Paper, paper, get your latest paper.
Is this the latest edition?
Hot off the press, pal.
Are you sure this is all the latest happenings?
Absolutely. Hey, look out!
I demand my money back. There's not a word in here about me accident. Yeah, and now for the latest bulletin from our sponsor.
If you want to monetize your skills or ideas, you'll need a stylish, professional-looking website, and this video sponsor Squarespace can help you with that. Although it may sound like a daunting task, building a website with Squarespace is much easier than you think. Their wide selection of customizable templates, coupled with their state-of-the-art Blueprint AI software, will have you up and running in no time. And as every Squarespace site has the latest SEO tools built in, you'll show up more often in search, thus bringing in more of your ideal customers. If you're booking classes, appointments, or sessions, a Squarespace site gives you everything you need to manage them seamlessly. So, whether you're selling products, courses, or just blogging about your latest adventure, Squarespace has the perfect solution for you. Give it a try by going to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/parlogram to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Filming and recording the concert was also a monumental challenge and unlike anything attempted before. Clayco Films, directed by M. Clay Adams, was commissioned to produce the TV special. Cinematographer Andrew Laszlo oversaw the filming with a dozen 35mm cameras positioned strategically around the stadium. The sound recording was handled by Fred Bosch, a 42-year-old engineer who'd previously worked as a field engineer for Altec on theatre sound systems, before working for Cinerama between 1952 and 1963. Beatles contracts required promoters to supply PA systems for vocals only. Instrument amps were considered sufficient, though in practice they were easily drowned out by screaming fans. In addition to their regular AC50 and AC80 amps, the Beatles were now equipped with Vox's newest and biggest AC100 amps, through which all their instruments were connected, including John's Vox organ. The vocals were amplified using an array of around 25 Electro Voice LR4 column speakers, which were positioned around the field, which you can see here. Now, these speakers had very narrow sound beams and virtually no low-end response, which is why they were chosen to amplify the vocals. However, this arrangement created a very odd sound environment, with screaming fans, vocals coming from one location, instruments from another, and a heavy echo from the stadium's curved structure. For the recording, the Beatles' amps and drums were mic'd using AKG Telefunken D24 and D19 microphones. Each vocal mic also had an RCA BK6B lavalier taped to it. Ringo's kit had both a boom-mounted vocal mic and close miking, including an Electro Voice 666 on the toms and kick. Fred Bosch and the PA engineer seen here working side by side behind the stage used Altec 1567A mixers, which, although were robust enough for broadcast work, were inadequate for live rock music and were easily overloaded. Recording was done on two Ampex 350 two-track machines, using a staggered crossover method so that one could start while the other changed reels. Track 1 carried the three vocal mics and kick drum, and track 2 featured guitar and bass amp mics along with the drum mic. Since the stage mics hardly picked up anything from the audience, a third mono recorder was used to capture the crowd ambience. Trying to mix on the fly in the middle of a baseball field with inadequate headphones while surrounded by deafening screams was an enormous challenge for Bosch, and Abbey Road engineer Sam Okell later called it crazy they got anything at all. Technically, the recording was a complete mess. It was full of dropouts and overloaded instruments, and one can only imagine the horror on the faces of Clay Adams and the Beatles when they listened back to the tapes.
Won't you please help me? How about I've changed my mind? Never done before. Changing love with heart, I feel fine. Well, I hope you'll come and see me in the movies. Then I'll know that you will plainly see the biggest fool that ever hit the big time. And all I gotta do is act naturally. Hey. Thank you.
So Adams called in his old friend and respected recording and film mixer Bob Fine for help. Although Fine quickly realised the field recordings were nowhere near broadcast ready, he made 3 attempts to mix them for film. 2 songs were left out of the film. She's a Woman was omitted due to a lack of footage caused by camera reel changes, and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby was cut for time constraints, although the audio for it was preserved and included on Anthology 2. However, after hearing Fine's mix, the Beatles and George Martin remained dissatisfied with the audio, and plans were made to improve the sound by re-recording some of the tracks. The Beatles had used CTS Studios back in May 1965 to re-record their vocals for Help, which you can find out all about in our video about that single a few weeks ago, and there's a link to that in the description. On this cold January morning, Paul McCartney was the first to arrive at the session, and by the time the others had arrived, he'd added bass overdubs to Dizzy Miss Lizzy, Can't Buy Me Love, Babies in Black, and I'm Down. They then set about completely re-recording Ticket to Ride, I Feel Fine and Help, which had suffered long dropouts mid-song. As time at the session ran out, they decided to replace the Shea recording of Twist and Shout with the August 30th Hollywood Bowl performance. However, since Ringo had sung I Wanna Be Your Man at that concert, they couldn't use the same approach for Act Naturally, so they simply used the studio recording of that song. The CTS recordings were then taken to New York and mixed with the original recordings into a finished mono soundtrack. The Beatles at Shea Stadium 48-minute TV special was first aired in the UK on BBC One at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, March 1st, 1966, in black and white only, in between Frankie Howerd and Teach Your Baby to Read. Ray Coleman's review in the music paper Disc was quite positive, but he thought it was a missed opportunity. At last, a successful attempt at the sort of TV documentary the Beatles have been denied for so long. That was The Beatles at Shea Stadium, screened by BBC One on Tuesday. Even this programme fell slightly short of the enormous possibilities in 50 minutes of Beatles dissection. But it was a good programme, capturing like nothing else has yet done the reality of Beatlemania, the urgency of the Beatles' personalities. Musically, it wasn't the best of the Beatles. Photographically, it was a trifle too busy. We could have done without much of the dancers, Sounds Incorporated and Brenda Holloway. But there was a sense of all happening. This concert in New York last August was attended by 56,000, and the vastness of the crowd was brought across. The Beatles came over with their usual zest, and George's comments at the end set the seal on the best TV Beatles show yet. They still missed out, though. Where were the interviews with the police, first aid people, fans? The Beatles at Shea Stadium appeared to want to do a documentary without actually getting involved. Still, it was spectacular enough. Record Mirror's report was more factual than opinionated, and concluded with the line, "Don't worry if you missed it, though. It simply must be shown again and again." Well, it was rebroadcast on the same BBC channel on the 27th of August 1966, but wasn't shown in full again in the UK until Sunday the 23rd of December 1979, which was the first time I saw it. Viewers in the States had to wait until Tuesday, January the 10th, 1967, when it was broadcast on ABC in colour, and with commercials added, it lasted 1 hour. It was briefly released on home video in 1978, before a lawsuit from Northern Songs forced its withdrawal. It's also been issued as a bootleg vinyl album, and can be viewed in poor quality on various sites on the internet. In 2016, the concert was restored for Ron Howard's 8 Days a Week film by Giles Martin and engineer Sam Okell. They decided to retain as much of the original Shay audio as possible, with the rule, if it was live and audible, they used it. That edit was shown in cinemas after the 8 Days a Week film, but unfortunately was not included on the DVD. But here we are nearly 10 years later, with neither the 2016 30-minute 4K restoration or the original 1966 film available to watch or buy, which is truly disappointing. So, what's the hold-up? Well, to be honest, I have no idea. Apple won a lawsuit against Sid Bernstein Presents in 2017, but there's clearly another insurmountable legal obstacle. Exactly what that is a mystery to me, but if you know, do tell us in the comments. Currently, the only items officially available related to the Shay concert is this small range of merchandise available on the Beatles website, which I think is a less than satisfactory tribute to such a landmark in Beatles history. If you were at the concert, I'm sure everyone would love to hear your memories and experiences of it in the comments. But that's all for this one, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.